So since we are in France, I decided to start my my presentation by citing a very famous French writer, which I really like. And he summarizes the problem for lawyers. That is, calling things by the wrong name adds the affliction of the world. And I know that Alexei said that we lawyers create gray areas. Well, we lawyers do not create anything. That is the first thing. We, in this matter, we just regulate. We receive from engineers what they can do. Philosophers and ethicists ask us, can this be done or not? And lawyers simply transmit to paper what people... You just got in time. I'm about to finish. No, I'm joking.
Sorry.
It's all right. So that is the thing. So calling things by the right name is a big thing for lawyers. Now, here I have some prototypes of what we can call autonomous systems at the moment. So we have a drone. As we know, drones are remotely piloted, so questions of autonomy do not raise with such acute problem. Then we have the first missile by the UK, the Brimstone missile, that has some autonomous functions in indirect mode. And then we have here an American kind of autonomous system. And here the prototype of my doctoral thesis. I think the only thing famous about my life is actually my finger. And this, little drone is called B drone. And I will explain why. So this B drone was designed for train stations to attack possible suicide vectors. So we have an injection here. So you see the needle. So we have the recipient for the poison. We have a camera for facial recognition, the microprocessor, and then 6 legs with sensors. So this B drone attacks here behind the ear in the carotid in order for the poison to get very quickly to the mainstream. It creates immobilized things through your limbs. So the person that feeling some crumbs falls on the floor, can simulate also an heart attack. Of course, we never kill a terrorist because we want to get information from if there is another attack being planned and so on. The thing is that not only has the technical autonomy to fly for 30 minutes, 7 miles per hour, which for a device that weighs less than 9 grams is huge, but also this B drone is activated by computers when the CCTV cameras outside identify a person that is fully armed getting into a train station. So we don't have in the activation, in the selection and engage of the target, the intervention of any human operator. Here we have a very recent in the sense that has been updated because it's something from the beginning of 2010, which is an American system that replicates an helicopter. At the beginning, it was just used for surveillance. Now it has attached a kind of ammunition for individual targets. Now, so until this new paradigm of artificial intelligence, for us lawyers, the problem of weapons was not a problem, because it would be everything about the user, the military commander. The military commander would be the person responsible for the use of the weapon. He would choose the targets, he would activate the weapon, and he would actually tell the weapon what to do. So artificial intelligence, of course, is not new, but we have, especially with the new paradigm of artificial intelligence and with the introduction of machine learning, we have the problem, much more familiar with this than I am, with the problem of the 4 V's. So the variety, volume, veracity, and velocity in which the data is processed. And so what we analyze in terms of application of this type of AI to modern systems of weaponry is that artificial intelligence creates three problems. First, the problem of dissociation of risk. So we do not have the soldiers on the battlefield. And that creates not only physical dissociation of risk, but also psychological dissociation of risk. And this is the first ethical question. Do I have the right to protect my soldiers for the dangers of the battlefield? Now, we know that with drone pilots, the level of post-traumatic stress disorder in drone pilots is much more acute than a soldier on the ground. That was the first thing that raises lots of questions. And why is that? So dealing with military psychologists, a soldier on the ground does not develop the worst enemy of a soldier, which is empathy. If I'm a soldier and I identify some of you as a target, I simply target you and you disappear. With drone pilots, they were sometimes able to follow and surveil a person for months. So drone pilots develop empathy by the enemy, and so they would suffer tremendously when they would receive an order to target an individual. So, as you know, there is a tremendous crisis across the board. So United States, UK, and all the countries in the world, France as well has a very intense drone program, especially used in Africa, in the former French colonies, that there is a crisis of drone pilots. So soldiers simply do not want to be drone pilots. And so artificial intelligence and autonomous weapon systems comes to reply also to this need to target people, but not to get our soldiers involved with the risks of the battlefield. Another problem that is very acute for lawyers is the dissociation of communication. So if the system is autonomous, if the system actually can identify, select, and engage military targets without the human supervision or human intervention, we need to ask ourselves what happens if something goes wrong. So if something goes wrong, to who are you going to attribute the liability for war crimes? So just this is not, probably people don't like law at all. So I'm just summarizing the entire laws of war in this slide. So in terms of laws of war, we need to be aware of two fundamental principles. One is the principle of distinction. So any single army in the world needs to distinguish who is a civilian, who is a combatant, and what is a civilian object, what is a military object. Of course, this definition on the ground becomes very, very difficult if we think about terrorists, for instance, because they behave as civilians, but they are military targets. So how to identify nowadays who is a combatant, who is a civilian, is really a big thing. Proportionality is when a commander is about to attack, he needs to be aware that collateral damage, so the damage to civilians, cannot be excessive regarding military advantage. Now, we have these problems being transferred to machines. So how these machines will learn to distinguish when a normal soldier also has questions on the ground. So to say that, that I'm a civilian, or if I'm a civilian that participates in the hostilities, if I'm actually a terrorist, this is a very complicated matter. So how we are going to code these machines in order to distinguish a problem that humanly is not yet solved. Then the proportionality is, how do you decide what is excessive? When, for instance, comparing the military, the British armed forces and the American armed forces, how they interpret the excessive is completely different. So military commanders assess excessiveness in a completely different way. So moving forward, so then we know, just to give a very recent example, that we have this complexity regarding the war in Ukraine. It's not the first war that drones were used, but the problem that we have not only private corporations building these drones without the military control of it, of its quality, but is this kind of very complex scenario when we have drones being deployed by a government, but they are controlled by satellites belonging to Starlink at the moment. Starlink controls 80% of all the data in outer space, which the United States is at the moment is not able even to control Starlink, which is another problem. And so we have satellites and drones and operators all coordinating a single attack. So when we talk about what is ethical and what is responsible, we become to be in very murky waters. Right. So now we go into the distress for lawyers, why lawyers get really nervous and anxious when they talk with engineers. So I was watching all the conference that floated last year from this single conference, and Professor Michael Fisher from the University of Manchester said something when he's talking about autonomy. He says, machines decide. And then he defines autonomy as the ability of a system to make its own decisions and to act in its own, and to do both without direct human intervention. Of course, Professor Fisher had the care and the attention to say during his conference that he was not talking about superintelligence yet. But look to a lawyer when he reads that the machine will decide. What is the machine deciding exactly? Because for law, if you decide, you are responsible for the decision. So are we talking about moral agents? And of course, everybody says no. But when we look to the capabilities of modern artificial intelligence, we need to ask ourselves, who is really deciding who is a target on the battlefield? Then we have Professor Ronald Arkin, there's a typo there, there's a D missing, that wrote basically the first book regarding, he's a roboticist, an American roboticist, that wrote that book, Governing Lethal Behavior in Autonomous Weapon Systems. And his thesis is that autonomous weapon systems will be more ethical than human soldiers. He writes these throughout his entire chapters. I just copy-paste. I'm not saying that I wrote that. So what does it mean for a roboticist that is exploring autonomy for many, many years, is the man who receives more money from the US government in terms of research in autonomous weapon systems, that promises that these systems will be more ethical than human beings. So what are we doing with language, and what are exactly we are trying to say with these concepts? And of course, then we are accused by philosophers that we are gray. We are not gray because the technicians are putting ourselves in this problem. Actually, when I was advising the Dutch armed forces, 3 or I can't remember, it doesn't matter, there was Professor Stuart Russell and Professor Koch from Germany in the same room, and they had a very intense discussion about the notion of artificial intelligence. They didn't agree about what artificial intelligence was in the military field. And then the Professor Koch looked at the lawyers and said, this is your fault, because you should define this. And how can we define when the technicians don't understand what artificial intelligence is? So the lawyers are not the guilty ones. We are trying to facilitate the work. But if the technicians do not give us the definitions, we cannot regulate. I know that Alexei is going to crush me afterwards, but I'm ready for the fight. Okay. Then in 2014, so Professor Noel Sharkey from the United Kingdom in 2009 alerted the world for the first time in an article in The Guardian saying, we have the technology to produce autonomous weapon systems. Was the first time that someone wrote about it. And immediately in 2014, the CCW, which is the Convention for Conventional Weapons, gathered in in Geneva until today. They gather every year to decide what is the future of autonomous weapon systems. So until today, after 15 years of meetings, so we have 3 meetings every year, we haven't arrived to a definition of an autonomous weapon systems. The states do not agree of what an autonomous system is. And then we have countries like Russia and Turkey that says without a definition, we won't go to a treaty. So we won't define the future. And then we have countries like the United States that we do not need a definition. We need to talk about the capabilities of each weapon. And then we have the majority of the countries in the middle saying, well, we need to wait and see if this is even possible. So, and we get this. If you go to the first definition offered by the British government, it says that an autonomous weapon system is a weapon that needs to have the same level of direction and intentionality of a human being. So imagine when I read that definition for the first time. So of course the UK said that it was against the autonomous weapon systems because we won't ever get these kind of machines as they were defining. Then the next year they changed the definition, but it's basically the same thing. So this is so then the government said, well, we need to gather experts. So they constitute every year a group of government experts where you find philosophers, ethicists, military engineers, lawyers, trying to find the definition and to regulate autonomous weapon systems. But since the first one was created in 2016, and they haven't get to any consensus regarding the definition. Now, then here is where my problems begin. So every single state is adopting the American definition that was slightly changed in 2023. And they define an autonomous weapon system as a system that, once activated, can select and engage targets without further intervention from a human operator. And I find very striking, I don't know, I want your opinion in you, is that this definition actually doesn't add anything to any other weapon that would work without artificial intelligence. Because you apply this system also to automatic machines, for instance, you could apply that definition. The definition that is below is the definition that I've been working that was slightly adopted with a little difference by the Dutch government and also by the Belgians, which I define a weapon system which is designed and programmed for a mission to be adaptive and to identify, select and engage military targets without human intervention. So that is how I define an autonomous weapon system. So it's a system that is designed and programmed for a mission and is called to be adapted to circumstances of the battlefield. So it's an open system, and the system needs to be able to identify, select and engage military targets without human intervention. Now, let's go to the technical problems that the lawyers need to deal with. So now we are trying to find who is going to be responsible. Will be the military commander, will be the military engineers, will be the universities that work for the military forces. And so we have different layers of responsibility, which is at the level of design and programming. Then we have at the level of the test, what we call the weapon reviews, which is mandatory according to the laws of the war, but only 7 countries in the world review their weapons. We have the phase of the deployment and also the after review. Of course, that we deal here with the big problem of the neural networks and the black box and the problem of explainability, which for a lawyer is something that we simply don't understand how something cannot be explained. Put yourselves in on the shoes of a lawyer. We need to explain something in order to find someone accountable. Then we have this question is, do machines actually decide or they only optimize outcomes? And if the answer is yes, how does the machine decide? So that is a big problem for international lawyers. Now, Australia has advanced. So Australia is the country who has developed more autonomous weapon systems, underwater systems, because of the conflicts with China. So, and they developed a very interesting way of addressing responsibility. They have a very famous military roboticists working for them. And this is very new because Australia is applying layers of responsibility to civilians that decide to design and program machines for the military. That is very new, to expand responsibility beyond the armed forces. So Australia proposed a framework for a system control, referring to an incremental layered approach to applying control, covering all the aspects of a weapon system from design through engagement, intended to ensure militaries are able to appropriately ensure that all capabilities, including AWS, operate in lawful, unregulated manner. So, talking with the people on the ground, with the military commanders, in the United States, in Israel, to talk about, the countries that are actually involved in armed conflicts, talking with them, a military commander does not know the intricacies of an autonomous weapon system. He doesn't have the technical knowledge. He knows how the system operates, but he doesn't know how to, if the system collects data from the satellites, if the system is trained in supervised data, if the system is receiving data from the environment. He simply does not know. He knows that the system was tested and he activates the system to find him targets. So Israel developed recently a new form of autonomous weapon system. So what is the problem of autonomous weapon systems for states at the moment? Is that the systems are extremely vulnerable and no state wants a system to become its worst enemy. So Israel has developed what we call the DSS, so is the decision support systems. So basically just to give a very kind of naive example, but in practical terms, a military commander would ask the computer, the system, find me all the Hamas fighters. And this system collects all the data that he has access to, and then he processes the data, and he offers to the military commander, you need to attack on Monday at 3 o'clock, that building. Now, in the tests that we do to the military forces, 96% of the military commanders didn't feel confident to question the system. It is the problem that we call of automation bias. It's not up to us to question data that we don't have access to. And if the computer is suggesting that is option A, we just go to the option A. So that is the problem that of trust and trustworthy systems, is that at the level of the military, they never question the system except when the solution offered by the system is clearly a violation of the rules of engagement that the military commander wrote. Now, ethical questions, and this is what I would like to discuss. The first question, that in order that states are very much concerned, and also the people surrounding military, is that if you can actually delegate the power to kill to a machine. That is something that I haven't seen anyone solving this problem. Now, if you say that is no, which normally is the first reaction, people say we cannot delegate this type of power to a machine, comes the second question. So looking to the reality of a drone pilot or of a traditional pilot of a military airplane, when he sees on the screen that he has reached his target, he pulls the trigger and then the bomb falls. Now, we know that there is an average of error. That is the reason they use lots of munitions, etc. So the question is, from the ethical point of view, is it different to have a human operator that simply receives an order to pull the trigger, to release a bomb, or a drone pilot that receives an order from a chain of command that for a normal drone involves 85 people before the drone pilot? He receives the order just to pull the trigger. Is that different of an autonomous weapons system, just because we have a human pulling the trigger? Second, in terms of states really involved with terrorism, so this is, sometimes people think this is all about states. No, there is no state in the world, I believe, that wants to kill people, let alone their own nationals. I remember working in a project of legal assessment to the British government when there was a red alert. So in average, we would find an attack of big proportions being dismantled once a month. And the thing is, can we afford collateral damage? If we have autonomous systems that promise to be much more efficient, not creating blood, we attack the terrorist. We do not need to send a bomb exploding a building. Imagine that now I'm Mr. Bin Laden. In a traditional AI ascent weapon, you had to destroy this entire building to get me. With this new technology, you create one of these mosquitoes coming in. I feel poorly. I fell on the floor. You think I'm having a heart attack. And then I go just to a special hospital, but you go home free of anything, and there is no collateral damage. If you think that terrorists normally work in very urban areas, so is autonomous systems a more ethical answer to collateral damage? And the philosophers of autonomous weapon systems tend to agree on this front. Is a more ethical question, and efficiency is more important than human accountability. So utilitarianism is the approach that the majority of philosophers follow this year. And then we have the last question, is can or should we have accountability for AI in military affairs? And why do I ask this? Because there is several military lawyers writing that human soldiers create much more situations of error on the battlefield than autonomous weapon systems. Soldiers get involved in emotions. They get post-traumatic stress disorder. They do not hit the target. 80% of the first shot of a soldier is misguided. So why should we have accountability for autonomous weapon systems when actually a soldier, when he commits an error, is also not guilty according to the laws of war? So should we have a system of accountability for autonomous weapon systems, or should we just test them until they are trustworthy and then we apply them? Now, the last thing is a problem that is raising lots of attention. I question myself if I should introduce this in this slide, but for the sake of the discussion, is the role of private corporations in warfare. So what recent authors from Stanford University qualify the Silicon effect, so the Silicon Valley. So first, public and private are so much intertwined that sometimes it's very difficult to distinguish what is public, what is private. Then the fact that private corporations deal with profit, they do not deal with human lives, they deal with profits. The assessment of risks is completely different. And we know that, for instance, the European AI Act has excluded weapons from the regulation of the Act, leaving states alone to decide whatever they think is best for their country. And then the problem that we have at the moment, especially for instance in outer space, as you know, in June of 2025, Russia deployed the first ASAT, so it is weapons to destroy satellites, which is completely forbidden by international law. The United States replied immediately, and since 2023, the United States declared the outer space as the new war domain. So it's the possibility very real that we will find recently a war in outer space with all the consequences that includes. So basically, more than explanations, I just brought you questions, things that is very difficult to gather in a room to decide the future of these systems. And the last thing I wanted to say is that, for me personally, a weapon is the destruction of a human being should be. But actually, when I dealt with assessments of governments, I also realized something that I was probably very naive. What it means for a normal state that we have our daily lives, we go to our jobs, with our families and so on. We do not know the real threat of terrorism inside of Europe. And actually, when we deal with the problem of terrorism, the states need, because it's the function of a state, of protect their own nationals inside and abroad. So how do we deal with this question is, it's this. So thank you very much for your attention. And I welcome all the questions.